So let's talk about the OpenAI API now and how you can actually embed some of this technology into your own applications and your own systems, which is all the rage these days. Let's start with the chat completions API, which is the one that they're really pushing you toward and the one that is probably most commonly used. It's really just an API into ChatGPT itself. So if you want to embed a chatbot into your application, this is how you do it. However, it's not just as simple as saying, here's a prompt giving me back a response. A chat can have a series of messages, right? And it can learn from the context of the messages that came before your prompt. So we're not just sending in a given prompt and getting back a response. That would be a very simple API, but it would limit you too much. Instead, you can send in this whole array of messages like we're seeing on the right here. And note that every message also has a role associated with it. So I can play the role of the system, the user, or the assistant. So when I send a system message, I'm basically telling ChatGPT what I want it to do. It might be, you are a helpful assistant, in which case it will just try to provide helpful responses. Or it might be, I want you to do sentiment analysis and classify what I say as positive or negative sentiment. Like this is where you can say just in plain English, what do you want how you want it to behave, what sort of output it should generate, maybe even the style it should generate it in, right? Now the user is you, so this is the end user trying to say stuff to ChatGPT and make it do something in response. And the assistant is basically ChatGPT coming back and giving you its response. So in this particular example, we're kicking off a chat that says to the system, you're a helpful assistant. So I just want you to be kind of generic ChatGPT here. The user is asking who won the World Series in 2020. The assistant comes back and said the Los Angeles Dodgers won the World Series in 2020. The user comes back and says, where was it played? And now if I pass this into the chat completions API, I should get back an assistant response saying, the World Series in 2020 was played at wherever it was. Okay, so you can see here we're passing in not just a single query, not a single prompt, but also the history that came before it, the conversation that should provide the context for that prompt as well. Now there are other parameters you can pass in as part of this API call. For example, you can specify which model. Here we're using GPT 3.5 Turbo. You could specify GPT-4 or whatever comes after that. You can also optionally send all this other stuff like the temperature. That will control how random the responses are, like we talked about before. An alternative way of specifying how random it should be is top_p, just the top probabilities that it should look at. Also n, how many choices do you want to generate? So if you want to get multiple responses to choose from, you can ask it to generate more than one. Just keep in mind you're being charged by the token here, so the more choices you generate, the more it will cost you. You can also choose if you want it to stream out the output one word at a time, like you see in the ChatGPT website, or if you just want to get the whole thing down at once. You can also specify a stop sequence. So if you fine-tuned this model somehow using your own stop token, you might need to specify what that token is so that it knows when to stop talking. Also, there's max tokens, the maximum number of tokens you want to output if you want to control your budget there. There's also something called presence penalty, where you can penalize or encourage tokens that already appeared, so you can try to prevent it from repeating itself that way. And there's also logit bias, which is a direct map to directly affect the probabilities of certain tokens. So if there are certain words that you really don't want it to say or you really want it to say, you can provide a map there to make that happen as well. These are all optional though. So let's go look at an example of using chat completions for real. So let's dive into actually using the OpenAI API for doing different stuff. Now, the first thing you need to do is have an environment variable that contains your secret key, your API token from OpenAI. And the first thing you need to do is go get one if you don't have one already. So from the OpenAI website, after you've made an account for yourself, you can just click on API. And if you need to get your token, you can get that. Just select your account, and from there you can view API keys and create new ones if you need one. So just remember that after you create that key and it shows it to you, you can never get that key back again. So make sure you store that someplace safe. And more importantly, for the immediate purposes, make sure you have a copy of that in your clipboard and throw that into an environment variable. On Windows, you can get there by just searching for system environment variables in your start menu there. And from there, you want to set up an open_API_key environment variable and set that to your secret key. Yours, of course, will be different, and do not use mine, please. Once you've done that, you're going to want to restart your Anaconda prompt here, or whatever your Python environment is, and install the OpenAI package, which is just a matter of saying pip install OpenAI. And I've already done that, so it's not going to do a whole lot, but for you, it might actually install something. Right now it's chugging away to make sure that I actually have that. So hang on. All right, yep, I've already got it. Great. All right, so with that in place, we are ready to write scripts against the OpenAI API. I'm going to use Python because, well, that's what I use. But you can also just hit it with curl requests from anything you want, or whatever you want to do there. Node.js, whatever they support. All right, let's get started with the chat completions example. Again, you'll find this in the Gen AI folder of your course materials. And we'll just look at it in our favorite text editor here. So we start by importing the stuff we need, most notably the OpenAI client object from the OpenAI package. Note the capitalization there's a little bit different for the client object. Instantiating that couldn't be easier, just one line of code, client equals OpenAI, nothing for parameters there. That will automatically go out and check that environment variable that we set for the secret key so it can actually connect to OpenAI using that client object. If you didn't have that environment variable available, you could pass that in explicitly there as well. So we'll start by prompting the user to type something in that they want to ask about to ChatGPT. So we'll say enter your prompt and put that query into a variable called prompt. And now we actually use the OpenAI API to create a chat completions call here. So the syntax there is just client.chat.completions.create to create a completion request. We specify the model we want, in this case GPT 3.5 Turbo. Those models do change over time, of course, so if that does get deprecated on you, just update that to the latest and greatest, whatever it might be, GPT-4, whatever comes after that. And now we just give it an array of messages with associated roles. So just like with ChatGPT, you can go back and forth and have a whole sequence of messages going back and forth to give it more context to work with. In this example, we're just going to keep it simple. We'll say that the system role is just being told that you are a helpful assistant, which is kind of like the default role for ChatGPT operating in its normal mode, right? And then we'll pass in the actual prompt that was input under the user prompt there as well. So just two things, the system's being told it's an assistant, pretty general guidance, right? And then we just pass along whatever the user typed in. All right, so once that's done, we're gonna print out what comes back. So we'll print out what actually comes back in the first choice. So once that's been created, that's gonna go off to OpenAI and get a response. And there may be more than one to choose from. So by saying 0, we're just gonna pick off the first one that it came back with and print out the content of that message. So that's gonna be the response back from GPT. And just so you can see the complete object there in its entirety and the other information that comes with it, we'll also print out the complete object there as well that came back from that chat completions create call. All right, so that's one example of just how to create a chatbot. You know, it's basically a very simple API for replicating ChatGPT in some other application, right? But it can do other stuff too. So let's use it for sentiment analysis in this next example here. Here we're going to prompt the user again for something that you want sentiment analysis done for. You know, is this a positive or a negative sentiment or what have you? Same syntax here as before. The only difference is that we're going to change that system prompt to give it more explicit directions of what to do. So instead of saying you are a helpful assistant, we're going to say, hey system, what I want you to do is classify user messages as positive or negative sentiment. So now it's going to know that whatever I say, whatever I pass it as a user, I should respond with, is that positive or negative sentiment? Other than that, exact same thing as before. We make a client chat completions create call that kicks off a request to OpenAI. It comes back with a response. We're going to pluck off the first choice that it gives us and print it out again, and again, print out the complete message response just so we can look at it. And finally, we'll do a little example of using the temperature setting. So we'll ask it to just tell me a joke, and we're just going to hard code that prompt in there instead of actually querying the user for it. Same model as before, but this time we're specifying a temperature of 0.2, and that should mean that we should get the same joke more or less every time. So we're going to say, you are a helpful assistant, again, just general guidance, but we're asking it to tell me a joke. And because that temperature is low, it should just give you the same joke pretty much every time. And honestly, OpenAI doesn't know a whole lot of jokes, it seems. So no matter what that temperature is, you'll probably get that same joke, but we'll find out. When we're done, we just print out the joke that it comes back with, and that's that. Just trying to demonstrate the syntax there of how to specify the other parameters there, temperature being one of them. All right, let's go give it a try. Let's go back to our Python environment here and just type in, well, first let's navigate to where this course materials are. So for me, that's going to be wherever you put it. For me, it's in ML course, and under there, there's going to be a Gen AI folder, and that's where these scripts live. So let's say Python chat-completions.py, and off it goes. So we're connecting to OpenAI. And I can type in any prompt, just like I would with ChatGPT. What is the meaning of life? And it will think a little bit. And it gives me back my response there, where I just extracted the response itself in the code there. The meaning of life is a subjective question, blah, 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 right? And then you can see the larger message that comes back in JSON format. So not only do you get that response, you also get back, what's the idea of this response? Where did it come from? What model did it come from exactly? What other responses might I have gotten? Why did it finish? Like, what was the role that this came back as, right? So in this case, we started with a system role defining what we wanted it to do, be a helpful assistant. The user said, what is the meaning of life? And the assistant role came back with a response. And we could keep on piling more and more responses on there, right? So we could keep going back and forth between assistant and user and build up this larger conversation and feed that back in if we wanted to. But let's move on to the example of sentiment analysis. I love this course. Well, I hope you do. And because I told the system to do sentiment analysis and be positive or negative, it came back with positive sentiment, as it should. And here's the larger response message here, where again it's saying the assistant said positive sentiment. And there's some more details about where that came from. Finally, we asked it to tell me a joke with a low temperature value, and it tells me the same joke every time that I run this. Why don't scientists trust atoms? Because they make up everything. Ba-dum-bum. Yep, tip your server. ChatGPT's here all week. All right, that's chat completions.